we're just going to record it. Post it later.
All right, we are live now. All right. Well, thank you for bearing with us. I think we've had some technical difficulties. Said we were not broadcasting live a little while ago, but we'll reintroduce ourselves. I'm a Communications and Outreach Specialist, David Allen, with the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, and I'm joined by State Quail Project Coordinator and Private Lands Program Manager, Reggie Thackston. He's also a lifelong bird hunter. We're happy to have him with us. And we're happy that you can join us today for our live quail season broadcast. And quail season starts this Saturday. I know a lot of hunters are very excited, Reggie, as are you. And we'll go ahead and start answering some questions.
Great. Yep, it's that magical time of year for those of us that like to walk behind bird dogs. So.
That's right. Well, Reggie, let's hop right into it. And maybe you can explain to us why bobwhites have declined across most of the state. Excuse me.
Yes, they have declined, but they've been declining actually for a long time. Quail were just an accidental byproduct of land use from probably the mid-1800s up through the mid-1900s, but they actually began declining close to 100 years ago, but that really intensified starting in the 1980s, and it's just in our change in land use. Quail don't occur by accident anymore. It takes purposeful management to create the habitat conditions that they need to thrive. And in a lot of the state, we've lost farming, and that's been replaced by urban suburbanization, by woodlands that are closed canopy, that is shading out the ground cover that quail need. They are what we call an early successional species. They need clump native grasses and briars and shrubs and legumes distributed across the landscape to meet their year-long needs. And the land use types that we have these days don't produce that kind of habitat unless it's planned within that system. So we've gone from what would have been just a sea of early successional habitat from the valleys and the mountains to the coast back in the early 1900s to today, where really our best landscapes that are left for bobwhites are down in the southern half of the state where there is still farming, but that's often big and clean farming. And there's still a lot of pine woodlands that can be thinned and burned at the frequency needed to benefit bobwhite. So the change in land use is why they have declined, but they can be, in appropriate landscapes, managed for to increase and sustain huntable numbers.
Okay. And a popular question we've had from a couple of people. How do predators impact bobwhite populations?
Well, bobwhites are at the bottom of the food chain, and everything likes to eat them, including me. But predation is a factor. That's what drives the mortality on bobwhite populations, and predation is also a function of the landscape context. So the landscape changes that I was alluding to earlier that have worked against quail in terms of not having the habitat they need to survive, it's kind of been a double whammy because it has increased the abundance of predators that eat quail in an ever-shrinking land base. So predation is a factor, but it is not the cause of the quail decline. It's just a symptom of the problem, which is that loss of large blocks of suitable habitat.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question that came in from David. Do alligators ever disturb quail nesting areas?
Yeah, that's a unique question, and you can't ever say always or never with wildlife. But quail are as I mentioned, an early successional bird of the uplands. Alligators occupy wetlands and riparian areas, and so they're separated from each other just by habitat requirement differences. So generally speaking, I'd say no, alligators aren't an issue with quail.
All right. Well, for some of our land managers out there, what might be the first step to managing land for bobwhite quail?
And that's a great question, and it's a great place for landowners to start, is thinking about planning for quail management. As I mentioned earlier, successful management for bobwhites requires purposeful integrating management for bobwhites into forestry and agricultural systems, and there are a number of ways to get technical assistance. But the first step is to get a person knowledgeable in quail management, like one of our wildlife biologists from the private lands program or through our regional game management offices, or a private consultant, somebody maybe with tall timbers, research station, along that lines, to come out and evaluate your property in terms of its potential for bobwhite management, not just the property itself, but the whole landscape around it, and then develop a plan that fits within your management constraints and to reach your objectives. And so the first step is just planning and getting a good plan, and then moving forward from there with implementation.
Okay. And here's a specific question from Scott. He owns 150 acres in Jasper County. He wants to know if it's feasible to develop a wild quail population in this area. His pasture area is about 30 acres with pines around the perimeter, and he's conducted controlled burns over the years, as well as harvested pines in rotation. You know, maybe you can touch on Scott's question a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate Scott's interest, and he's starting at the right place by asking if it is feasible. And Jasper County is actually in our Piedmont physiographic province, and at one time we had an abundance of quail there, but that whole landscape has changed dramatically since those times, and it's really not the landscape that we would prefer for quail management these days. We have better potential and lower constraints to management down in the upper coastal plain, still in the farm country, and on that size tract, one of the things we really learned about quail in the last 20, 25 years is that they are what we refer to as an area-sensitive species. And there's a lot of variables that determine this, but really you need about 3,000 acres or more of suitable habitat. It doesn't all have to be contiguous, but suitable ground cover to support and long-term sustain a wild quail population. So his opportunity and potential will be limited very much in Jasper County. But that having been said, some of the work he's already doing sounds really good. If you thin pine timber and prescribe burning on a frequent basis, typically every other year in a checkerboard pattern, fairly small burn units, distribute with that weedy or fallow openings that quail use for brooding. Then if there are quail present there now, he will help sustain them. Mm-hmm. He might even in that situation, he could see an increase, but again, it depends on what the landscape around him is like. And that's the first thing we look at when we go out to work with a landowner, is not only their property, but what does that 5,000 or 10,000 acres around them look like. And that can help determine if it's feasible to meet their management objectives. But if he does that habitat work in Jasper County that's beneficial for quail, even if he doesn't get a quail response, it's going to help wild turkeys and deer, rabbits, as well as a whole host of songbirds that need that early successional habitat just like quail do, and many of which are declining just like quail are. So my advice to Scott would be, he's probably limited on his potential for quail, but one of our biologists would be glad to visit with him and give him more site-specific guidance.
Okay. Well, another follow-up that Scott had, you know, would releasing pen-reared quail help reestablish a wild quail population? I know that's a question among probably many landowners out there.
Yeah, that's a question that's been asked a lot and for a long time. And there's actually been a fair amount of research work done on pen-reared quail and looking to see if they can be effective at reestablishing self-sustaining wild quail populations. And the short answer is they're not. They have poor survival rates in the wild, and they're also not very efficient at reproducing and raising young quail. Some pen-reared quail do survive and do nest, but they typically don't make good parents and are not effective at bringing offspring into the following fall population. They've got their place in training bird dogs or providing a semblance of wild quail hunting, that experience, but they're not effective for reestablishing wild quail populations. And we've done some research actually here in Georgia looking at that. And so the best way to get wild quail back is manage habitat at the appropriate scale in the right landscapes, and that can be effective.
Okay. Maybe a more general question for, you know, Scott had a pretty specific one, but a more general question for those maybe getting started. What kind of assistance do we provide landowners who wish to manage their land for bobwhites?
We have wildlife biologists, again, in the game management section, private lands program, and our quail program in particular, but also some of our regional biologists that are available to go out and meet with landowners, depending on the situation, and look at the land and provide a management plan or recommendations for that property. There's also, again, wildlife biologists available through other organizations, like, for example, the Wild Turkey Federation or through Tall Timbers Ecological Research, Tall Timbers Research Station and Land Conservancy, and other organizations, private consultants that have quail management experience. So that's the first step, getting in contact with one of these groups. I would say that it is important to make sure when you get someone to come look at land for quail management that it is someone that has quail management knowledge and training, because everyone can't be an expert in everything, and so you want to get somebody with that level of expertise.
Obviously, you touched on this one a bit earlier, but, you know, does managing land for bobwhites improve habitat for other wildlife species? As you mentioned, it does, but I didn't know if you wanted to go more in depth with some of those examples.
Yes, and you can't be all things to all critters on the same acre, but when you manage for any species, you're managing for a group of species that have similar habitat needs, and quail again are an early successional species, so those critters, those wildlife species that have need of early succession for part or all of their life requirements are going to benefit from bobwhite management. And you know, that includes wild turkeys and white-tailed deer and rabbits, but also a whole host of non-game species, some of which are in serious conservation need. Gopher tortoises, for example, Backman's sparrow, prairie warblers, we could go on down the list, but quail habitat does benefit a whole association of wildlife.
Here's a question from Barry. He wants to know why don't we manage more WMAs for quail as opposed to deer? Obviously, you know, deer is our most popular game species. Right. You know, very popular for hunters. So that might have something to do with it, but maybe you want to expand on that a little bit more.
And it's a great question, and the fact is that many of our wildlife management areas are not located in a landscape context that's conducive for wild quail management. They're not surrounded by a landscape that has that habitat like quail needs, so that we can provide that level of habitat at the scale that would elicit a quail response. Some of the areas are not themselves suited for managing for that early successional habitat to the degree that would be needed to get a quail response. So we are limited in availability of WMAs that are suitable for quail. But that having been said, we do have some areas where we do try to manage to enhance quail numbers and provide public quail hunting opportunity. One that's been very successful is over near Waynesboro, Georgia, near Augusta, and that's Die-Lane Wildlife Management Area. It's really the area we have right now where quail are the primary objective. But we've seen through the last 10 years with intensive management, we've seen that quail population take off and do really well. We have quota hunts there, and it's high quality public hunting. It's one of, if not the best public hunting areas for quail in the southeast right now. And we have some additional areas down in southwest Georgia that we're right now looking at to try to do more for quail on. So we do have some management areas targeted for quail work, and some that are open to public hunting that have reasonable numbers of quail, and so we hope to have more of that in the future, and are working on that.
Okay. And this is another question that we got that came in. Why can't bobwhites be stocked the way that deer and wild turkeys were stocked, to restore their populations in Georgia?
Well, I helped work on the turkey restoration end of things in the early part of my career, and it was a challenge in itself, but it was easier than quail restoration, because with turkeys and deer, both the habitat was there. It had recovered from the old farming days, and all we really had to do, which was still a large task, was trap wild turkeys or deer from existing wild populations and put them into that unoccupied habitat. With quail, the problem we face is that the habitat is gone. Mm-hmm. And so first we have to create the habitat, and in most cases there's enough wild quail hanging on that we do get reoccupation of that newly developed habitat if it's done at the appropriate scale in the right landscape context. So stocking quail is not our solution to the problem. I wish it were, but it's changing that landscape level habitat, particularly in the southern half of the state across our farm and forest lands.
Right. I guess you can expand on a little bit. What is the plan to restore bobwhites in Georgia? What are we currently doing as a division?
Well, we do have a plan, and we've actually been working on this formally since about 1999, when the Bobwhite Quail Initiative was developed, and for over 10 years it was focused in about 15 counties across the upper coastal plain, and we experienced some real success stories there at the farm scale, but not at the whole county-wide scale. But we have since, under a newly developed, and we helped develop, a national plan called the National Bobwhite Conservation Initiative. We have revised Georgia's Bobwhite Quail Initiative, and it's about to be released publicly in the next few months. But what it does is targets restoration effort into about 22 landscapes that vary from 30 to 100,000 acres in size, and we can't bite off these all at once. So we've picked 7 of those to try to really work more intensively in terms of providing technical assistance to landowners, trying to get landowners to form cooperatives, to put a larger landscape together for quail. And we have, within these focal areas or focal landscapes, we have core bobwhite habitats that exist now that support these huntable bobwhite populations, and what we want to do is build on those out onto private land and public land in those focal areas. So we do have a plan. It's very targeted and based on the best science we have, and we're looking forward to moving forward with the implementation of that plan in the near future. In fact, we're working on it already.
Yeah. And you mentioned die lane earlier. What are some other examples in Georgia where bobwhites have been successfully restored and sustained for hunting?
Okay, and I'll start with some public areas, but die lane is our best example. But we have some management areas like River Creek WMA, Albany Nursery WMA, Chickasaw Hatchie WMA, that have, and Elmendale Wildlife Management Area, that have huntable numbers of bobwhite. Some of these areas are quota hunts only. Some are opening for a very limited time. So what I would do is encourage anybody that wants to hunt those areas to look at their regs. The wildlife management areas are listed in the hunt regs, which are available online or by hard copy out of the hunting and fishing stores, and see what days they're open and how to, if you have to apply or if it's just open during those days. In addition to that, through the Quail Initiative, we had some successful restoration efforts across private farm and forest land, working farms and forest in the upper coastal plain, and we're continuing to work with private landowners to restore bobwhites that have that as an objective on their land. And then finally, one of the things I think is just really unique for Georgia and as well as North Florida is that we have in Georgia about 500,000 acres of wild quail managed lands that are privately owned and are managed very intentionally for quail, where quail is the objective. And these places, some of them have been in existence since right after the Civil War and kept detailed records of their quail populations, and they have the highest densities in many cases of wild bobwhites today that has ever been recorded. And so it shows you there's no mystery to the quail decline. It's just having enough of the right kind of habitat out on the landscape. And so there are a lot, really, of success stories for bobwhite management today. But again, they don't occur by accident anymore. It takes intentional and purposeful management at the appropriate scale and the appropriate landscape to make it happen.
Yeah. And you mentioned some of the public opportunities that people have, to hunt quail on WMAs, and I'm assuming that those would probably be your recommendations for the best WMAs to hunt bobwhite quail on.
It would, and for those that are interested, they can get more details by calling the Regional Game Management Office, and the area, the region of the state that has the most opportunities right now is Southwest Georgia, Region 5 Game Management out of Albany, and if they call there, they can get more details on those specific areas.
And you did go earlier into some of the predator problems, maybe possibly affecting the quail population. Barry wants to know, why doesn't the state aggressively reduce the coyote population?
Well, coyotes get a lot of attention these days, and they definitely can be on deer an effective predator. Actually, it's interesting that on quail, and there's been a lot of work done through the University of Georgia and Tall Timbers Research Station using cameras monitoring quail nests over the last 15 plus years, I guess, and coyotes don't show up as a strong quail predator. In fact, one of the things they really do prey on heavily are red foxes, and red foxes would be a much better bird predator than coyotes. But all that having been said, why we don't get rid of coyotes is because coyotes are very adaptable and they're survivalists, and states like Texas and parts of Oklahoma have been trying to reduce coyote populations for a long, long time at great, great expense, and haven't been able to do so. But for the landowner that wants to try to reduce them, you can trap them and shoot them year-round here because they are an exotic. They weren't native here. And so that opportunity is there, and that's about all the state can do, is just provide that opportunity to try to work on them if you want to.
Right.
So.
Looks like that's most of the email questions that we have. You mentioned the state's plan to help restore and sustain bobwhite quail in Georgia. Now, how is the bobwhite quail initiative funded?
And that's a very important bottom line question, because money is the bottom line. But it's funded through the sales of this tag. This is the new version. It's really nice artwork, bobwhite quail and a white-tailed deer and a strutting wild turkey. So I guess it's paradise. But anyway, the proceeds, a portion of the proceeds from this tag are what fund the program. Along with, we try to get grants from folks like the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, or the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and other organizations, and direct donations. And if somebody wants to donate to the quail program, it's tax deductible. And that information is on how to do that is available on our website. So GoHuntGeorgia.com, and then they can access the quail program, the quail webpage, and it gives details on how to make donations, and all of that money that's donated goes directly to quail management. It's earmarked.
Well, Reggie, thanks for joining us today. You know, I hope everybody was able to get some valuable knowledge from you, and I'm sure that everybody did. For everybody going out this weekend, all you quail hunters out there, hope everybody has fun, and remember to be safe out there. Reggie, you got any words for anybody else?
Well, I'd echo that. To be safe, quail hunting is a wonderful sport. It's what led me into wildlife conservation for a career, but it can be dangerous if you're not careful, because these quail are flying fast at about head height. So just be cautious and have a great time, and